Welcome. We are very privileged to be working with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra this season because they have a series of guest conductors. So today in the studio we are joined by Maestro Nir Kabaretti. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So this week's program is all about Beethoven. You have 3 Beethoven-inspired or his works. So what will the audience love about this program, and what do you love about this program?
Well, first of all, it's a part of, I think, a mini cycle of Beethoven, so that was the idea. I think the 9th Symphony is performed and some other pieces, so it certainly fit in this cycle. And, the Pastoral Symphony is an all-time beloved piece.
It's my favorite Beethoven symphony.
Okay, I'm happy to hear that. And, of course, since Walt Disney put in Fantasia, then of course it got much broader exposure, more just the concert goers, but really to the wide audience. So, and it has some of the most beautiful tunes, and I think that was the idea. If we can have this kind of piece that everybody can appreciate, regardless to your knowledge of music. And we did add another piece, the Leonora Overture, number 3, and this piece that you said, inspiring Beethoven, which is sort of an interesting approach from an American composer of how Beethoven got his idea to write this famous motif from the 7th Symphony. So he gives a sort of different setting of this motif. Instead of playing it by the high woodwinds as Beethoven does originally, then Mr. Putz does use the lower brass. Instead of major, it's in minor. But this idea of repetitive thing that goes and develops itself until it comes to the right thing, and then actually the composer does quote from Beethoven's symphony exactly as Beethoven wrote it. It's an interesting approach to how a composer comes to the idea, and we all know how Beethoven was struggling with ideas. It was never an easy approach like Schubert or Mozart or other composers who just wrote it down.
Sketchbooks that he carried around with him.
Exactly.
So there's also the Saison Cello Concerto, number 1. And now you have been the director of the Santa Barbara Symphony since 2006 and get to work with them on a regular basis.
That's right.
So what is it like coming in and working with a new orchestra and a guest artist where, you're not working with them all the time?
Well, it's also having guest artists, different one in the same year. It's quite normal. We do like to bring back people, so it happened that every 2 years or so I would work with artists that I worked with before. But seeing somebody new is always it's a challenge and an interesting approach, because you are enriched by somebody's different ideas. And I love working with guest artists, and we are very privileged to have Ed, who's really a phenomenal cellist but also a great musician. So it makes the work of a conductor much easier. Working with a new orchestra, this is a little bit more complicated, I would say, because while you work with a guest soloist, we normally have a meeting between the soloist and the conductor without the orchestra, so we can go through the music without anyone else, that we just sort of try to get our opinions on the same level. And of course it's always the soloist take as a first, because they are playing these pieces maybe for 20 years or 30 years, while for a conductor, we have a huge repertoire of solo concerti. I mean, we play the piano concerti, the violin, the cello, the trumpet, the harp, whatever, and they have their own short list of concerti that they are reviving every year or second year. So of course their relationship with the piece is a deeper one, a longer one. So I wouldn't like to come and sort of dictate my tempi and say, okay, that's the way you should play it. No, I always give them the chance to inspire me, to convince. But then there are always ideas that the conductor brings. Oh, the orchestra does it this way, or maybe we can change here a bow to match the orchestra, or it'd be really nice if you could do this or that. So I try to accompany him, but at the same time we bring our ideas to the same page. So you get a sort of personal contact immediately before the rehearsals even actually start. With an orchestra it's different, because you have all of a sudden 80 new faces or 120, depends on the piece, depends on the hall. And that's tough. It's first of all, you want to make sure that there's a nice feeling. And to convince a group that do not know you to play with you, and now with an orchestra there is no this flexibility that you would have with a solo. I can accompany you, I cannot accompany the orchestra. It's like somebody has to take a decision about 100 people that are sitting together and have to follow a certain direction. Obviously within the orchestra there are some solo moments in every piece, symphony, and if an oboe player or a flute player would like to phrase it in a beautiful way, which is maybe different than what I thought, then I buy it. But in terms of the global ensemble, we do need to have one decision. So it's I think the very first minutes are sort of nervous for both sides. They don't really know you, and they want to see if they can trust you. They can trust your hands, first of all, and they can trust your musical ideas. And for the conductors also, I think nervous for every conductor. And in my previous jobs as assistant conductor, I worked in opera houses and symphonies. I worked with some of the greatest conductors, and sometimes they were guest conductors that they were in the 70s, and I saw they are getting nervous before the first rehearsal. So it's something very common.
Yeah. And speaking of opera, you kind of get to do it all. I think you're very lucky that you still conduct opera as well as symphonies. I hear that so many conductors kind of get labeled as they know the big classics so well or the new music guy, but you kind of get to do it all. So what is it like working with an opera versus working with a symphony?
Well, first of all, this is one of the differences, if you probably want to make it clear, it's one of the differences between European system and American way of producing musicians, conductors in particular. I think everybody, and that goes back to the old days, I would say 50, 60 years ago, and still when I attended the school in Vienna, I was shocked that in the examination to get into the school, I had to play a Beethoven sonata on the piano and a concerto on the piano. And I said, wait a second, if somebody cannot play the piano, he cannot be a conductor. And the philosophy was behind it, we cannot secure you a position as a conductor because it's very difficult. But if you're a good pianist or musical, and you will be able to accompany a singer, then you can get a job in an opera house, and from there make your way up to from the rehearsal room to the pit and then to the stage. So there is a certain way to do it. So you start as a coach, or we call it in German Korrepetitor, and as a coach you work with the singers, and then you maybe do rehearsal with the chorus, and then do the backstage course. In every opera there is a band outside that announced that the arrival of the king, and somebody has to conduct it. So if you're lucky, they will give you this. And then maybe a conductor would get ill and you have a chance to do a rehearsal. And even better, if a conductor has, for whatever reason, have to miss a performance, then they ask, okay, where is the coach? He knows the tempi, he knows the singer, he should take over. And that's pretty much what I did. And so from the piano, I became got the chance to work in an opera house, and from then you get to work with orchestras. And by the way, I want to say just something, it's important that maybe here the students will know. In German, there is a difference to say about somebody who is an opera staff conductor, that's called Kapellmeister. And if you're a conductor, it's a dirigent, which is a different thing. So,
interesting.
Yeah. And so because of this experience, I'm comfortable with opera, ballet, chorus, whatever. I'm a little bit against the thing that somebody should conduct only pieces from 1820 to 1824. I think a musician, at least at education. Then if you want to specialize and this is something else, but I think the education should be broadened. Every student should have the opportunity to learn a Verdi opera, a Wagner opera, a Mozart opera, the same as a vocal staff by different composers, different styles.
Well, and in your work, and you went to school in Europe and work here regularly, what do you see as the biggest difference in the classical communities between Europe and States today?
Well, historically, it's a big difference, first of all, the way of funding it. So while Europeans are mainly based on government support. In the US, the support is mainly privately, it's rather corporate or private money. And this alone creates a very different approach to the music. So I would say in Europe, you don't really think too much about what the community needs or what the audience, because you're not really financially, you're not depend on the income of a ticket, or not to the extent that it's here. So an artistic director, and I've been involved in that as assistant and as a conductor, could say, okay, I would like to do this opera that nobody heard of. 200 years it would never perform, but that's my idea. And you can do that, and if the hall is empty, it's pity, but it doesn't really affect your annual budget to that degree. In America, you would never do something like that, because you really depend on the income. It's a big percentage of your budget, the ticketing, the private sponsorship, and you don't want to do something that people will be uncomfortable with that, or at least most of the organizations. So this has, of course, a different approach to what kind of music can you do. I like a lot the way that in America, many times a conductor would talk about a piece. I mean, Leonard Bernstein did it many years ago. In Europe, it's still a taboo. I mean, nobody talks. It's like, we don't talk. We come to hear. you know, so, and of course, the taste of the audience can be a little bit different. But.
Yeah. And so to finish up, Polyphonic reaches out to many young musicians. So what is your best advice to a young conductor or musician who is about to embark on their career?
I would say, first of all, get to as many rehearsals, concerts as you can. I think part of the learning, as much as a teacher can give you schools and things like that, you should see the practical life of it, because as much you can learn, there are always different problems. And with orchestra, if you can be explored to these problems, it will enrich you immensely. I would encourage students to learn languages. This is something that's, by the way, very different also from the European, because in Europe is so small and divided, and everybody has to speak languages, because otherwise nobody will understand you. As American, you are lucky, and there is advantage that everybody, English is the language of the world. But if you really want to get into Mahler's mind or to Beethoven's idea, it is better to read it in the original language. It can be translated, but the translation is not that. The same thing if you want to learn Italian opera, learn Italian. I mean, it's different approach when a conductor can follow the singer's language, because it influences their phrasing, their breath, and things like that. So I would encourage students to language, to be active in the concert hall. I can tell that from my experience and my fellow colleagues, the school, like here, by the way, in Innsbruck, that is so close to the concert hall, we were constantly between classes going to hear the Vienna Philharmonic with guest conductors, guesting orchestra, and it was a huge experience for us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and good luck to all the wonderful students that are joining the market.
Thank you.
Thank you.